Welcome to the Destiny Project, a Jewish view of world history. This is the sixth session. As I explained when we began, this series is being done in conjunction with a book that I'm writing, and basically I'm writing a book with the participation of the listeners. And the book is divided into four parts. The first part is called Prologue. The second part is called Ancient Times. The third part is Medieval Times. And the fourth part is Modern Times. So the last three parts, you can imagine what they are. The prologue is there to establish the principles and the guidelines that based on which the book is being written. Depends on where we come from, what we believe, what are the principles, and so let's go start from the beginning. This is the sixth chapter in the prologue, and I'll just briefly review what the first five chapters are. So in the first chapter, we discussed if we're studying world history, where does world history take place? So we explained or suggested that there is a part of the world called the Imperial Quadrant, which is basically includes Europe and the Middle East and North America. And whatever happens in this area, the Imperial Quadrant, that exerts its influence on the entire world. Whatever happens outside that is not necessarily exert its influence on the entire world, which is not to say that China is not important, but China exerts its influence on the entire world through its interaction with the countries in the Imperial Quadrant. So since this area is the area that influences events in the entire world, then if we're studying world history, this is where we have to look for what drives world history. What happens between Brazil and Argentina is really parochial history and doesn't really drive the history of the world, whereas what happens between Germany and France or Russia and the United States, or whatever goes on there, influences the history of the entire world. That was in chapter 1. In chapter 2, we discussed the idea of perspective. We explained that societies are like houses in a valley, and they see themselves and they see the other houses. They don't really know what's going on in the other houses, and the other houses don't really know. I mean, they could peek into the window and maybe visit, but unless they live in those other houses, they don't really know what the geist of what's going on in that house. So we just have an external view of the other houses and an internal view of ourselves. So when we look out from our house, our society, and we see the world, which is the valley with all the houses, the perspective on this valley is colored by our view from inside our house. And this is the way all societies work. So everything is perspective. How do you look at history? This perspective, that perspective. And we are going to do, so the perspective from which this book is being written is the perspective of classical Judaism. So in the next chapter, we discussed what is classical Judaism. Classical Judaism there are many streams to Judaism. There are Orthodox and modern Orthodox and Hasidim and Reform and Conservative and Reconstructionist and totally assimilated secular Jews. There are many, many different Jews. But what defines classical Judaism? Three things. One, the belief in the existence of God. Two, the belief in the divine origin of the Torah, and three, the idea that a Jew is defined by his being part of a covenant with God. And therefore, we have Jews of all races and all languages living all over the world, But since we are part of the covenant with God, that defines us as Jews. How do you become part of the covenant with God? You become that way through heredity. If you're born into a Jewish family from a Jewish mother, then you are part of the covenant. And if not, you can join the covenant through a process of conversion. And in that chapter, we also discussed the concept of our belief in the existence of God, and we offered a mathematical proof, and I'm not going to mention it over here, but you can go back and see what that is. And then the next chapter, we spoke about the purpose of creation. God exists, and why did he create the world? So this is, a complicated philosophical discussion, but what I suggested in chapter 4 is that God is the divine artist, as Gemara says. God created the world because he is the Tzayor, Ein Tzayor Kelokenu. He is the divine artist, and this world is at least one of his masterpieces. I don't know what other masterpieces he made. We don't know the whole portfolio, but this universe is his masterpiece. And what makes this, so first of all, it's incredibly phenomenal, gorgeous, intricate, brilliant, as it is. But what brings it to the next level is that the world can recognize, the painting can recognize the painter. And that is the purpose of creation. God created a masterpiece, and he put in an element into this masterpiece that part of it has consciousness and choice, and through its consciousness and choice, it can recognize the painter, and this is what our purpose is, this is what his purpose was. That's our role here. And then in the 5th chapter, we discussed our belief that the Torah is divine origin, and how do we know that there was an exodus from Egypt, and how do we know that there was a stand at Mount Sinai where we got the Torah. So we discussed the idea of the collective memory, which is a really very fundamental idea in understanding the world, that societies have common obligations, common responsibility, and common memories. And these memories are passed down from generation to generation organically, not through testament, but organically they're passed down from generation to generation. And the genius of the Torah and the Chachamim, Chazal, their genius was that they ritualized the memory. They made it part of of a Jewish person's life, is full of rituals that memorialize the events of the Exodus from Egypt, and by extension of the giving of the Torah, and by ritualizing it, it can go on forever. Now, is this an absolute proof? Probably not, because if a person really wanted to engineer this, it would take a tremendous amount of effort and a tremendous amount of time to engineer this kind of a thing, but that is very remote. And like the Rambam says in the Moira, that with hardly anything that you can prove absolutely, but you have to make reasonable assumptions. And the most reasonable assumption by far is that the memory is genuine. To engineer a memory for an entire society would take a Herculean effort and a tremendous amount of time and money, and it's a very, very remote possibility. So basically we can dismiss it. So we know that with the Jewish society, the classical Jewish society, retains, because through its observances and through the way it lives, it retains the memory of the Exodus, the memory of the giving of the Torah, and it actually preserves that memory for the entire world. Because just as we discussed Kosovo, now that the societies, the Serbian and Kosovo societies, remember the Battle of Kosovo, which took place in 1389, because it's driven by tremendous passions of hatred and revenge. So we, who have nothing to do with Kosovo, at least I don't, but I believe that there was a Battle of Kosovo. But it's more than just believing in Columbus, because I see that people are killing each other today over the Battle of Kosovo. That means that they have a collective memory of it, so that validates it to me. So I know that there is a Battle of Kosovo. There was. It doesn't play a role in my life, but as a distant observer, I assume that it happened and that it's true, and it's not some fiction that was made up for history books. By the same token, the entire world is able to observe the society of classical Judaism, and they see our collective memory, and this should be evidence to them that is genuine, even though they don't share the collective memory, but they just see our collective memory. So this is what he discussed in the first 5 chapters. And this chapter, this is the final chapter of the prologue. And in this chapter, we're going to discuss why we should study history. Now, you could ask, that should be the first chapter. We're starting a book about history, and a project. We're going to discuss history. Really, we should right away. Wait a minute. Why should we discuss history? Really, that should be the first. For some reason, it's the 6th, and there's a good reason for this, because the answers to this question depend a lot on the principles that we laid down in the first 5 chapters. So, why should we study history as Jews, classical Jews? Why should we study history? So, one reason, obviously, what Rashi says in Parshat Zino, that we should see that if we sin, we get punished. Okay, we open up the Chumash, we see that. We did an egel, we get punished. We see that. Okay, but that's not a complete study of history to get into all the events that happened over the years. That's not really what we're going to gain out of it. I mean, we got it, do a sin, you get punished. We got it. What is the rest of it telling us? To know the exiles, and we went here, we went there, and this happened, and that war. What is that? So there's a famous quote from George Santayana, a prominent historian, about a little bit over 100 years ago. He says, "Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it." Now, that's true. That's true, and very famous saying. But really, that doesn't apply to private people. If I'm going to study history, it's not up to me whether this applies to presidents, to ministers, that they're going to conduct the foreign policies or the economies, that they should see what happened in the past, they'll know what to do. To me, knowing what happened in the past, at the most, it will affect who I vote for, which is really not that significant. And if you have 100 million people voting, I don't think it's so critical for me to know this, that my vote will make such a difference. That idea of remembering the past is really not applicable to most people. But we find that the Gedolim of the Jewish people over the years were all very conversant in Jewish history. We should just learn Torah and do mitzvahs, but they knew history. What was the purpose of knowing that history? I want to offer 2 reasons. First, I want to give an analogy. A person gets married, and he or she joins the family of the spouse. So, do they become part of the family? Now are they part of the family? So I would think that if they don't know the lore of that family, if they don't know it, if they don't know where they came from and what they went through and who their ancestors were and what their experiences were, if they don't know any of that, they just meet them. These are the people today, and we talk about different things. We don't know anything about the background of this family, I would say that this person really is an outsider. He may be married to one of the family, but really he's an outsider. He's not part of that family. Maybe, halachically, legally, he's part of the family. When he wants to, somebody dies and he wants his share, then all of a sudden he's part of the family. But really, in essence, he's not really part of the family. He's standing on the outside. So in order to be part of a family, to be part of a group, you really need to know what they're all about. Where did they come from? How did they get here? What are they all about? That's important. So that applies to societies as well. We are part of the Jewish society, classical Jewish society. So we need to connect to our own society too. We need to be connected to people of our society. So in order to be connected to people of our society, we need to know the history of the society. What is the lore of this society? If we want to be also part of American society, in addition to being part of the Jewish society, we also want to be part of American society, then we need to know what the American society is about. Because if you don't know anything about them, we never heard of George Washington, never heard of Abraham Lincoln, we don't know anything about the Constitution, we know nothing. So really, we may be living this country, but we're outsiders living this country. If we want to be part of this country, at least to the extent that it doesn't conflict with us being part of our society of classical Judaism, then we really need to know something about them. If we want to be part of the world, we need to know something about the history of the world. We need to know the lore. Now, how much do we need to know? I guess, you have to decide for yourself how much. But it's important to know, at least in general terms. You don't have to do in order to be part of the society, you don't need to do a deep dive and to get all the details. But at least in general, you should know what it's all about. So this is one reason it's important to study society, be part of the world at large, and to be part of our own people. Not to be just, genetically or halachically, connected to Judaism and to Jews, but really to be like an outsider inside the family. If you want to be part of the Jewish people and share the historical experience of the Jewish people, you have to know what's it all about, what happened. That's one reason. And then there's another reason, which has to do with the purpose of creation, as we discussed a couple of chapters ago. There's something called deism, which means the belief in God, but that God has no role in history. Many of the founders of, the founders of the Republic, the original signers of the Constitution, were deists. They believed that God existed, but they didn't think that God had any role in history, in the events of the world. They created it and he sat back to watch it, and without interfering. We do not believe that. We remember the Exodus from Egypt, we remember the stand on Sinai, so we know that God is involved in what happens in the world. Exactly how is he involved in that? How does he do this? Does he do it supernaturally or naturally? This we will discuss in future chapters when we get into the beginning of ancient times, which is creation. What happened by creation? But so when we talk about knowing God, about the painting, recognizing the painter, you have to recognize, you look at the tree, you say, wow, look at the tree that God made. Look at the ocean, this is the ocean God made. Look at the galaxies, this is what he made. And that's what God wants. He wants us to recognize the painter. But he also wants us, one of the main things that God has done in this world, besides making trees and butterflies, is history. what happens in this world, the world is a stage, and everything is happening on this stage. And God is the playwright. He's not just the artist who created the stage, the beautiful, beautiful stage, and all the props. He is the playwright who is guiding and directing all the events that happen on this stage. So therefore, we should see that. We should observe it, and by observing it, we could recognize him and fulfill the purpose of creation and to fulfill our role in the purpose of creation. This is why I left this question until the 6th chapter of the prologue. So this completes the prologue, and next session we will start with history. Thank you very much. I hope to see you.